Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live broadcast, Mitigating Risks and Optimizing Security of Supply in Diagnostics. I am Jen Woods of LabRoots, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Today's educational web seminar is brought to you by LabRoots and sponsored by Cytiva. For more information about our sponsor, please visit their site at cytiva.com. Now let's get started. I would like to remind everyone that this event is interactive. We encourage you to participate by submitting as many questions as you want at any time you want during the broadcast. To do so, simply type them into the Ask a Question box and click on the Send button. If you have trouble seeing or hearing the presentation, click on the Support tab found at the top right of the presentation window, or report your problem by clicking on the Ask a Question box located in the far left of your screen. I'd like to now introduce our presenter, David Raw, Supplier Risk Management Leader, Cytiva. For a complete biography on our presenter, please visit the Biography tab at the top of your screen. David, you may now begin your presentation.
Thanks, Jen, and welcome everybody to this presentation, Mitigating Risks and Optimizing Security of Supply in Diagnostics. I'll jump right in and take a look at the agenda, the themes that we're going to be exploring in this presentation. So first of all, we're going to take a look at the importance and impact of security of supply. We like to take a data-driven approach at Cytiva. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And then how we look at mitigating supply risks, particularly during unprecedented events. And then what product and workflow decisions customers can make to reduce supply risks. And then finally, we'll wrap up with a quick look at industry trends. So here is a synopsis of the presentation, if you like, how a data-led approach supports the development and implementation of measures to maintain supply levels, even in uncertain times. And as I said, we'll be taking a look at some of the workflow considerations that can help customers reduce supply risk. So if we look at the diagnostics market, the sales of IVD products used in point of care and clinical lab testing is forecast to increase close to 4% a year, and then by the end of 2021, be a market that globally is north of $72 billion. Together with an aging population and those kind of trends with rising disease levels, and heightened demand for detection and diagnostic solutions in response to the coronavirus pandemic, these things will all contribute to that growth. And in addition to that, medical providers are increasingly relying on point of care and clinical lab tests for early detection to facilitate them delivering appropriate therapies. So, in recent unprecedented events, we have faced in Cytiva, in our diagnostics business, a number of challenges. And those challenges, sort of paramount among those, has been production capacity, uncertainties around the supply of critical raw materials, logistics routes, and pricing. And at the same time, customer demand increased tremendously for some of our products. And at the same time as that, forecast accuracy reduced. So as a result of this, capacity requirements were difficult to plan. And on the next slide, we see how we describe what we view as an increasingly complex supply chain environment. But at Cytiva, security of supply has long been an intrinsic part of our culture and our business and our way of thinking. And we strive to take a wing-to-wing, cross-functional approach in an attempt to secure the supply chain and involve stakeholders from across our business. A number of ways we do this. First of all, we aim to standardize our work to make sure that things are repeatable and dependable in our processes, and that we have clear roles and responsibilities. And when it comes to analyzing risk, we strive to take a data-driven approach. And this enables us to look more objectively at how we prioritize risk mitigations and supplier risk management. And in addition to that, material consistency is needed because biological processes often have narrow tolerance windows. So in that regard, we're very dependent upon our suppliers. So this slide depicts what we see as a complex supply ecosystem related to our Sera-Mag production. And as you can see at the top, we have a number of raw materials, some of which are off-the-shelf, simple raw materials, others more complex and can be made to order by our suppliers. We have some of each of those that are single sources and some that are multiple, where we have multiple suppliers. So this raw material ecosystem is complicated and requires different types of material management to secure supply. So the raw materials that are taken in, sub-assemblies or semi-finished goods are produced, and then the semi-finished goods are bottled and packaged and then distributed to our customers. And all the while this is going on, we recognize that we need to minimize the change control burden on our customers. We need reliable and consistent supply. We need as low as feasible risk and a high degree of transparency to our customers and from our suppliers, and consistent product. Now, one of the foundations of our security supply program is our supplier qualification process. And we have rigid purchasing controls measures in place. So the first stage on this slide, over to the left, is our supplier evaluation process. Okay, so the first thing we do, and this is a process that's undertaken by sourcing, is supplier selection. Okay, so at that point we look at the feasibility of a particular supplier being able to produce the product consistency and to the capacity that we need before taking considerations any further. And at this point, we might select more than one supplier for evaluation. The next part of the process is supplier categorization, and this is undertaken by our supplier quality engineering team. And they evaluate suppliers based on the types of components that they're going to produce for us, and produce a risk delineation between the raw materials. And based on that supplier categorization, then the type of supplier qualification process is decided. And then in the middle section, the wheel, if you like, that's a graphic that shows how we continuously monitor the performance and reevaluate our supplier performance. So it starts with performance monitoring. On occasion, in instances of poor performance, we issue a corrective action report, but we also continue to monitor suppliers' QMS status. We have a rigid and very demanding change control process in place. And then, of course, it's fair to say that none of this would really work without the collaboration of our suppliers. So just on the right-hand side, I just want to summarize that, you know, our suppliers are required to have a quality management system in place, but we also place requirements on our suppliers in terms of what the standards they should achieve in terms of integrity, business continuity management and recovery, and supply capacity and capability. And we audit our suppliers on a risk from a risk-based perspective regularly. So in the next section, I want to take a look at how we use a data-driven approach to work with supplier risk management. So first of all, we have an in-house developed tool called the Sourcing Risk Finder tool, which takes a number of inputs, both internally and externally, and contains over 14,000 component items, it produces a risk score for each of those items and each of the suppliers that produces those for us. And then obviously we, on that basis, are able to better prioritize our risk mitigation activities. And here you see on the slide 2 or 3 examples. So we have, for example, as a result of this work, implemented dual sourcing for some of our key reagent components. We've increased raw material safety stock from a risk-based understanding of where that would be most beneficial. And for our more complex and high-risk components, we strive to use primary producers, which increases quality and stability in our supply chain. So in addition to the Sourcing Risk Finder tool, we also use a 24/7 continuous incident monitoring solution that's provided by Resilience 360. And this provides end-to-end visualization and real-time alerts regarding potential incidents that may disrupt our supply chain. So throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, we have received continuous updates about threats to our both suppliers' ability to manufacture, but also threats to our logistic partners in shipping material to us. This has been a continuous and ongoing input from Resilience 360. So this tool also provides incident advice when it comes to natural and man-made events such as earthquakes, strikes, for example, at airports, or any regulatory changes. Now I'm going to say a couple more words about the Sourcing Risk Finder tool and give you some detail on that in a couple of slides. So this tool has been developed in-house over the last 5 or 6 years. It analyzes over 20 supply risk attributes, and I'll take you through what some of those are in a little while. But we have most of the components that we source are in this tool. And the reason is that we just think that taking a data-driven approach to understanding what supply risks, what are the highest supply risks and how we should best mitigate them is a worthy objective. So the Sourcing Risk Finder, I said it uses more than 20 risk-based attributes, and here are some of them. So we look at suppliers' financial health. We look at various attributes related to quality, whether the supplier is residing in a geographical risk zone, and this could be a political risk, but also perhaps more obvious geographical risks, such as if a supplier is located in an earthquake zone, for example. We do a business continuity management survey on a subset of our high-risk suppliers in each of our factories, and that is also a factor in the Sourcing Risk Finder score, and that produces some supply chain visibility as well. And then we look at perhaps the usual candidates from an item perspective: on-time delivery, how long it takes a supplier to produce and supply to us. The transfer lead time is one of our highest rated attributes in the Sourcing Risk Finder, and the transfer lead time is our estimate of how long it would take to transfer to a new supplier if we had to. We also look at how much safety stock we have, both in-house and at suppliers, whether an item is single or sole sourced or has multiple sources, and for certain of our chemical suppliers, the criticality, that is to say, what effect the raw material has on the performance of the finished goods. And then lastly, we take a view on whether we have identified or implemented second sources. And so when we've collected all that data, we use this equation to produce a sourcing risk index for each part And after that, the sum of the part sourcing risk index provides us with a sourcing risk index for each of the suppliers. So we divided the sourcing risk index calculation into two areas, the impact and the probability. And on the left-hand side, you can see the impact calculation. That is transfer lead time minus the safety stock multiplied by the revenue. So as an example, you could say that if you have a transfer lead time, that is, it will take you 3 months, as an example, to transfer from one supplier to another if you had to, but a safety stock of 2 months, then in the event that you have disruption in your supply chain, you in theory will be standing still, unable to produce for 1 month. And we multiply that by the revenue that we receive associated with that raw material to produce a calculation as to the impact to our business. And everything else of the attributes that I showed on the last slide is included in our the section on the probability. And the attributes have different weightings according to how important we think they are. So that's how we calculate the sourcing risk index. And on the next slide, I'm going to explain business continuity management survey that we undertake, as I said, with a subsection of our high-risk suppliers. Okay. So what we do with this survey, well, first of all, I should say that we take a different approach depending on whether the supplier is a distributor, or a manufacturer. And we interrogate our suppliers as to how they manage their supply chains and what approaches they take when it comes to business continuity management. So as I said, we focus on the high-risk suppliers. We look at whether the supplier has calculated a recovery time for a major incident, whether it's done business impact analysis or risk analysis of its key operations, whether a supplier has second sources for its critical raw materials, the levels of safety stock, and whether there are alternative manufacturing sites. So in this way, we hope to gain an understanding of our suppliers and to a certain extent our sub-suppliers when it comes to how they manage risk. Okay, so when it comes to measures that we take to mitigate supply risks in our genomics business, just want to run through a couple of scenarios and a couple of examples. So when it comes to genomics and diagnostic solutions, in 2019, we undertook a very thorough supply risk analysis, which analysed hundreds of raw materials, and we looked at over 5,000 risk attributes in total. And we looked at the finished goods that we manufacture, ranging from Sera-Mag beads to DNA amplification kits. So that project took 6 to 9 months. And what the result was, we were able to identify our highest risk raw materials. We developed a multi-year risk mitigation program, and we have in place a cross-functional team with clear action plans. And we meet on a regular basis to ensure that we are driving the rigor as regards to the implementation of these risk mitigation actions. At the same time, in our Whatman business, we did a similar exercise, but this was based on site workout. So this took a much more focus on our manufacturing operations. So each step of our manufacturing processes, from the delivery of raw materials through to all the resources and the equipment that were used, were analysed and to gain a thorough understanding of the level of risk and the potential impact from potential disruption. So what the team did thereafter was create a comprehensive risk mitigation plan, and this looked at the qualification of additional raw materials suppliers, additional training and cross-training of current staff, recruitment of new staff where needed, and then we've also put in place a security of supply leader who leads these initiatives on an ongoing basis. So this provided us with a better footing when it comes to managing increases in demand during the recent pandemic. So on the next slide, I want to just quickly talk about our risk mitigation toolkit. So there are 9 titles in our risk mitigation toolkit that range from implementing second sources, managing our inventory both internally and externally, and different areas of financial and contractual support. But what I wanted to do on this slide was just describe our approach to second sources. So we have 5 levels of second sourcing or dual sourcing. The first level is market screening, and that's simply that we've identified potential alternative suppliers. Level 2 is supplier evaluation, where sourcing look at the supplier to see that they're feasible in terms of meeting our standards and our requirements. Level 3 is material evaluation conducted by R&D, which is a document analysis of the feasibility of the materials that would be supplied by a potential supplier. In level 4, we've done full R&D testing at bench scale to validate the raw material delivery and performance. And in level 5, we've fully implemented the second source. And the reason we have different levels is because our aim is to reduce the transfer lead time, that is, reduce the risk and reduce the time it will take us to implement the second source, but at the same time, minimize the change control burden as far as our customers are concerned. So when it comes to trying to position ourselves for success in uncertain times, when the COVID-19 pandemic started to impact our business, some of the risk mitigation plans were already underway. So we had already reviewed the article data stored in our ERP system to ensure it was accurate. We had the correct lead times and inventory values, and so on and so forth. We'd started a program to look at short-term risk mitigation initiatives, and this was focused very much on raising raw material inventory and including vendor-managed inventory. And we'd also started a project to increase the number of multiple sources and multiple manufacturing options with the same source that we had for our high-risk raw materials. And in addition to that, we continued with our open communication and having a clear change notification process with both suppliers and customers. We continue with our fairly rigorous supplier auditing program, but we had a review of the buying strategy, and we continue to be very rigorous when it comes to the testing and verification of incoming goods. So we have continued to conduct regular risk reviews, and these are conducted primarily by the sourcing team. And when we saw demand changing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, the regularity with which these were conducted was increased dramatically. So we try and get ahead of problems and avoid supply issues. And then, of course, we continue to review our strict quality and supply agreements, review these on a regular basis. Okay. So in terms of where we stood when the coronavirus pandemic started to affect our business, as far as magnetic beads were concerned, our supplier risk management program was underway, but very, very far from complete because we'd only done the analysis in 2019. But we looked at raw material, both internally and externally, and that gave us a healthy starting point where we'd already taken some steps to increase that. We have close relationships with some of our key suppliers, and they were really instrumental in helping us lower lead times and receive deliveries of material much quicker than would normally be the case, just to support our very high and short-term or urgent demand, I should say. So We were very grateful to have great support from our suppliers and extreme flexibility. But we'd also taken, at the back end of 2019, we'd executed on implementing a strategic review of our strategic logistics partners. And so we reduced the number of logistics partners that we had dramatically, and this was implemented actually January 2020. So we've been very grateful and pleased with the collaboration we've had from our logistics partners, and they have enabled us not only to receive material from faraway suppliers, but also keep deliveries flowing to our customers. So because of this, we were able to triple our magnetic bead manufacturing output in just a few months during 2020. When it comes to membranes, we looked at increasing working patterns, moving to 24/5 production, which increased production capability by 40%. And we have the capability to expand that further, moving to 24/7. I think I've already mentioned that we recruited extra personnel, providing more flexibility in the workforce, and we moved to daily prioritization meetings to make sure that the in-demand products were being manufactured on time and in the correct quantities to support customer demand. We now have weekly reviews of capacity to ensure that demand is not, that capacity can meet the demand that is required. And in addition to that, sort of the last point is that we've implemented direct shipments from a centralized warehouse to reduce delivery times to our customers. So just finally on this point, in terms of the ongoing learnings from these unprecedented events, we found that we were in fairly good shape because not all of our initiatives were complete before the pandemic, but we had put some foundations in place. We need to further improve the quality and integrity of the data in our ERP system to make sure that we can rely on that and use the system as it was intended. And we are continuing a comprehensive review of raw material inventory, and we need to finalize that strategy to further protect the business in times of crisis. We have ongoing work, which we will continue when it comes to developing multiple sources for the highest risk items. And as I said at the start, really, security of supply is a key strategic pillar for the business. And we have a multi-year program of continuous improvement in place. So we hope to continue to have this top of mind, continue to have it as a priority in the business, and the intent would be for us to get better and better. Now, when it comes to what customers can do to secure supply, there's a few points that I'd just like to draw out, really. So first and foremost, we depend on our customers' forecast, and this really helps us plan tactical and strategic capacity and enables us to be in a better position to meet your demand. Secondly, the issuing of purchase orders, firm purchase orders to support demand and cover that demand is also a crucial factor. When it comes to the systems and reagents choice, we would very much encourage consideration of the impact of closed systems. So for obvious reasons, the use of open systems does facilitate security of supply, because for consumable reagents, a customer can choose from a number of vendors if they have to, if supply is constrained. And then when it comes to designing components, we strongly advise customers to take a hard look at the security of supply measures that those vendors are taking. And it's also important to work with suppliers that have strong change control notification processes in place. And this needs to be replicated at N-1 and N-2 levels of supply to ensure that consistency of supply can be maintained. It's important to have a robust supplier audit process in place as part of a way of keeping control over supply. And it's important, despite the fact that there are change control burden options, it's important to keep an open mind about the possibilities of dual supply options. So when it comes to the future, in terms of security of supply, we see a few things at play. First of all, the digital environment is going to be a key enabler in this space. Okay, so there are developments in the pipeline, and they're really potentially going to transform the way supply chain logistics, supply chain transparency, and supplier risk management is handled. And we're looking into these with a number of vendors, in particular looking at the use of digital documents, the use of big data, machine learning or augmented intelligence to support our decision making when we have so many components and so many attributes at play. And then, of course, sophistication in the way that the large data sets are handled is really needed in the context of interdependent supply chains. So there'll be a need from across the industry for increased transparency, which will enable greater accuracy and capacity planning, but also when it comes to inventory holding and simply being able to focus on prioritizing the mitigation of the highest risks. Okay, so in terms of availability and quality of data, that's going to be a key enabler. So manufacturers will be able to anticipate changes. They will be able to proactively adapt, I should say, operations to meet rapidly changing requirements. And customers will be able to track performance and analyze effects of different variables in manufacturing. So in addition to that, we're going to just spend a lot of time advancing our ability to identify high and low risk areas, and I say using sophisticated data analysis methods to make sure that we are prioritized in the right areas, focusing our risk mitigation efforts on our highest priorities, and therefore hopefully continuing to be able to supply our customers as they would expect. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, David, for your informative presentation. We will now begin the live Q&A portion of the webinar. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please do so now. Just click on the Ask a Question box located on the far left of your screen. We'll answer as many of your questions as we have time for. Let's get started. Our first question is, what investments are you making to ensure business continuity?
Thanks, Jen. So I think it's quite timely, really, because Cytiva recently made an announcement that we are, over the next 5 years, going to invest over $500 million and recruit approximately 1,000 people globally to support increased capacity, and this will enormously help us secure supply in the future as the growth in the industry is predicted to continue.
Okay, our next question is, in what ways are your higher management involved in enterprise risk management?
Like I said in the presentation, we consider that enterprise risk management, security of supply is part of the culture in Cytiva. We're very pleased about that. We get great support from our executive committee. They're very interested in the different initiatives that we're taking to secure supply to our customers across the business. And on a quarterly basis, we have an enterprise risk management team meeting with our executives where we focus on the current focus areas in our security of supply program.
Okay. Our next question. Can you give a recent example of your business continuity strategy to enable product deliveries to continue even during unprecedented events?
Yeah, sure. So there was one great example involving our Cardiff factory and our genomics business, where the strategy that we'd set during 2019 as a result of our analysis, the actions that we'd started to take towards the back end of 2019 and early in 2020, which were focused around greater collaboration with some of our key suppliers, increased raw material inventory, both internally and at our suppliers, and increased number of multiple sources in that part of our product portfolio really enabled us to significantly increase production in just a few short months. There was a lot of work involved, and we got great support from our suppliers and our logistics partners, but in the end it worked very well. It was a success story.
Great. And we have time for just a few more questions. I want to remind our audience that those questions we were unable to answer today, or those that come in during the on-demand period, will be answered by the speaker via the email address you provided at the time of registration. Our next question: what are your biggest business continuity risks, and how have you mitigated these?
So in each of the businesses or the factories, we have undertaken a business impact analysis. So for each of our major manufacturing operations, we understand exactly what our largest risks are from a business continuity management perspective. Okay, and those risks do vary by site. But one example in one of our factories, that it was through this analysis, we understood that the biggest risk was fire. So what we did was we moved certain parts of our highly flammable supply into an area that was where it was much safer from a fire perspective. But we also have part of our manufacturing operations operating in nitrogen controlled fire suppressant technology. So that's one good example.
Great. Okay, we have time for one more question. Can you describe your supplier audit qualification program?
Yes, I can. So thank you for that question. So, you know, our supplier audit and qualification program has sort of two key areas, really. First of all, there's the supplier selection stage, where we look at what capabilities the supplier has and make sure that they're that they can do what we need from a feasibility perspective. And then we would categorize the suppliers by undertaking a risk assessment. And there are four categories to our suppliers, and depending on these, depends on how often or under what circumstances we audit our suppliers. So type 1 would be a critical supplier, which offers significant risk. We have type 2, which is we categorize as an important supplier, offers major risk. Type 3, an important supplier with minor risk. And type 4 is a supplier with negligible risk. And depending on how a supplier is categorized, we take a risk-based approach to whether and how we audit them. So we audit our high-risk suppliers on a rolling basis, but with a risk-based approach to the frequency. And then some of our lower risk suppliers, we conduct desk audits or paper audits. So we take a risk-based approach, but we stay in touch with most of our high risk and suppliers of critical or important raw materials.
All right. Thank you again, David. Do you have any final comments for our audience?
No, I just would like to thank you for being my host today, and also thank you to everyone who joined us for this discussion. And I hope in some way it was at least a little bit useful. So very much appreciated your participation.
Before we go, I'd like to thank the audience for joining us today and for their interesting questions. Questions we did not have time for today and those submitted during the on-demand period will be addressed by the speaker via the contact information you provided at the time of registration. We would like to once again thank David Raw for his time today and for his important research. We would also like to thank LabRoots and our sponsor Cytiva for underwriting today's educational webcast. You can view the webinar on demand. LabRoots will alert you via email when it's available for replay. That's all for now. Until next time, goodbye.